Namaskar and welcome to the Gandhi Katha, story of Mahatma Gandhi narrated by me during the commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, which incidentally is also the 150th birth anniversary of Kasturba Gandhi, his wife. Kasturba Gandhi's suffering, sacrifice, and commitment in making Mohan into the Mahatma and inspiring thousands of women to fight against injustice and racial discrimination in South Africa and in the non-violent freedom struggle in India is extraordinary. I express my deep gratitude to H.E. Srimati Suchitra Doreji, Ambassador of India, and Srimati Aparna Patwardhan, Director, Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Bangkok, for hosting the Gandhi Katha amidst these challenging times to learn from Gandhiji's philosophy of truth, non-violence, and purity of means, his spirituality, his environmental credo, and his practices of health and wellness of body, mind, and spirit for coping up and staying safe physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually during and after the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic, which has affected the entire humanity. On October 2nd, the world celebrates the UN International Day of Nonviolence, and in India, we celebrate Mahatma Gandhi's birth anniversary as Gandhi Jayanti. The entire world is remembering Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of peace and nonviolence. We have an opportunity to remind the humanity of the efficacy of the messages of Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our nation. I pay my respects to the leading lights of Thailand and convey my warm wishes to the Thai people and the large Indian community, and especially to those who have joined me online today. The close ties between India and Thailand have a history rooted in strong commercial, cultural, and people to people links across a millennium. The two countries share a common ideological perceptions. India and Thailand, located in each other's extended neighborhood, share a maritime boundary in the Andaman Sea. India's bilateral relations with Thailand are rooted in history, age old social and cultural interactions, and extensive people to people contacts. The shared link of Buddhism is reflected in regular pilgrimages to places of Buddhist interest in India by a large number of people from Thailand. Hindu elements can be found among those reflected in Thai architecture, arts, sculpture, dance, drama, and literature. A large Indian diaspora living and working in Thailand is another important bond. There is a Thai version of the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, which is well read and understood and to have a better understanding of Gandhiji in Thailand. On October 2019, His Excellency Mr. Vijayvat Isra Bhakti, Vice Minister, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Thailand, in his speech at the UN office in Bangkok, urged leaders to start working towards change to prevent a rise of violence by citing Gandhi's words, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." Mr. Arithit Oirait, President, Rangsit University in Bangkok, wrote an article in the Gandhi Anthology, and I quote from parts of it. Gandhi's teachings are popular, convincing, consistent, relevant, and coherent throughout the world. Mahatma Gandhi showed us through his example that it is quite normal to live in such groups on the margins of society and that it is possible to consider everyone to be equal. Gandhi Katha is based on the ancient Indian oral tradition of Katha or storytelling with hymns and narration. I have given talks on Gandhi Katha in more than 100 countries, hosted by the Indian missions during the commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Gandhiji in the past 2 years. In all the countries, people have great reverence and respect for Mahatma Gandhi. Many have been inspired by him to take up the cudgels against injustice through nonviolence. Others have followed his environmental credo, and still others have been deeply touched by his simple, frugal, spiritual life. The humanism of the world's thought leaders are so deeply reflected in Mahatma Gandhi's teachings. The new generation is eager to understand more about the greatest man of the last century, who made such a huge impact on humanity and inspired many world leaders. Gandhiji used to begin and end his day with prayers. These were prayers from all the religions of the world, Sarva Dharma Prarthana. Gandhiji's internal core comprised of the essence of all the religions, one that he had acquired from long study and reflection. The devotional poetry of the saint poets that he had heard, sung, and absorbed since childhood made up a significant part of the life of his soul. He said that ultimately all the religions point to the same truth of compassion, truth, love, and tolerance, and that everyone must study the essence of all the religions in an attitude of perfect reverence and have friendship and respect to the practitioners of different religions and diverse cultures. All of Gandhiji's friends were from different religions and cultural backgrounds from around the world, and he actively encouraged friendships across religions. One of the legacies to the world given by Mahatma Gandhi is the nonviolent conflict resolution through interfaith dialogues to establish harmony, peace, brotherhood, and unity. In the ashram prayers, in the morning and evening, the first verse from the Ishopanishad, the shortest Upanishad from India, used to be recited. Ishavasya sarvam yat kincha jagatyan jagat tena tyaktena bhunjitha ma gradha kasya svidhanam, that everything in this universe belongs to God. Nothing really belongs to us. Enjoy the objects of the world in an attitude of perfect non attachment. Enjoy it with a feeling of sacrifice, taking it to the extent that is necessary for you, and leave the rest for others in the society. Never ever crave the possession of others. Nothing really belongs to us. I will play the Gandhi Katha dhun, which sings about this same thought of renounce and rejoice. That is how Gandhiji led his life. And It is in Hindi, so we will play that for you. Even after 7 decades have gone by since Gandhiji passed on, in every part of the world, his relevance is felt as strongly as ever before, and his visions and actions are of an enduring significance for all times and places. His approach to life was holistic and cannot be divided into watertight compartments of social, religious, political, personal, and public life. Gandhiji stands out as the champion not only of political democracy but also of economic and spiritual democracy in today's world. Gandhiji believed that moral degeneration is the root cause of all evils, including conflicts. This explains his lifelong crusade of attainment of moral values such as truthfulness, nonviolence, purity of means, love, self control, forgiveness, respect, friendliness, compassion, mercy, and so on. For Gandhiji, the principle behind satyagraha or nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience was by non cooperation with evil through the moral values of love force, truth force, and soul force through sacrifice and self suffering. For him, the consideration for the sufferings of fellow human beings was of paramount importance. His belief and actions that social change for establishing justice and dignity of humans is both less harmful and more sustainable when achieved by non-violent means are very relevant. His legacy of satyagraha, which is widely recognized and practiced in the world over, is seen in many movements for civil rights in the contemporary world. Mahatma Gandhi's environmental practices or the environmental credo were based on conservation of natural resources, which were often used and overused, misused for the sake of development. Gandhiji had warned about the unsustainability of these practices on the global scale and had said that greed will be the main reason for the environmental degradation and the ecological crisis. And this he had predicted more than a century ago. Gandhiji was the first environmentalist much before the rest of the world was caught up in the concerns of environment and ecology. And with his stunning premonition and knowledge, he had declared that the earth has enough for man's needs, but not for man's greed. He had also said, the earth, the air, the land, and the water are not an inheritance from our forefathers, but on loan from our children. So we have to hand it over to them as it was handed over to us. Equality for women within the society was a principle Gandhiji passionately believed in. His vision of Sarvodaya, the welfare of all, becomes very relevant in the crisis of internally displaced people and migrants. It may well have been thought, keeping in mind the very basic unit of human organization, a village or a county. His vision of Gram Swaraj, which is a self reliant, independent, self governed village built on the premises of sustainable development and growth, is the need of the hour. Perhaps the greatest source of strength for Mahatma Gandhi was in his faith in God. Truth was the deepest and the most complete form of God. The faith gave him the constant awareness that he was to be nothing but an instrument in his hands. He was to go wherever he was led. For him, the guidance of God constituted two things. One, he had to walk on the path enlightened by truth that was available to him in whatever measures and form. And on that path, hundreds of world teachers had already walked. Two, he had to constantly gaze inwards and find inspiration through self introspection, self examination, and self purification. This he did by repeated questioning, and that question was Ko aham, who am I? What am I? And what is the real purpose of my life? This question has been asked in our ancient Indian civilization since the past 5,000 years. The answer came to Gandhiji as he heard the inner voice that the real purpose of life was to serve others. The deeper the faith, the greater was the endeavor for Mahatma Gandhi. He said, Truth is God, Satya hi Parmeshwar hai. Faith in truth led Mahatma Gandhi to two other realizations. If God is omnipresent, then truth is omnipresent too. If each human being were an aspect of God, then each person is capable of being truthful, of being good, and doing good to others. The second realization was that in spite of all the upheavals in the history of humankind, humanity will only progress in an auspicious direction because truth, that is God, is only interested in the welfare of its creation. His endeavor throughout his life was devoted to the search of that element of truth, to awaken it and to nurture it. This is why he could feel oneness with everyone. For most of us, this realization does not set in easily. But because of this understanding of oneness, Gandhiji had no enemies. He did not want to settle scores with anyone, and he did not want to take any revenge. He merely wanted to extend his love, compassion, and respect to everyone, and that was one of his traits. The other one that we see in him, that he respected individuals as individuals without attaching labels. And this is one more trait. And the other trait that we see is that he remained ever positive in life. He faced many challenges, many problems, but in spite of all that, he never lost his cool. The other trait is that he treated all work as God given work and did every task with equal reverence. And there are many traits that we see in Gandhiji. I have spoken only about a few. Romeo Rolla, the famous French writer and a pacifist who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, had written the biography of Mahatma Gandhi in 1924. And through that, the Western world came to know about Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhiji had gone to meet him on his way back from the Second Round Table Conference in London in 1931 and spent 5 days with Romeo Rolla in Switzerland in his hometown Villeneuve. And they spent a lot of time discussing about the crisis of civilization and other things that were happening in the world. After Gandhiji left, Romeo Rolla wrote a letter to his friend, and I quote from parts of it. This little man is so fragile in appearance, is tireless, and fatigue is a word that does not exist in his vocabulary. He could calmly answer for hours without a muscle of face twitching. His mind proceeds through successive experiments into action, and he follows a straight line, but he never stops. Now I will play the Gandhika Tahim in Hindi, which elaborates on Gandhiji's definition of truth as having harmony between thought, word, and deed. And there is a Gandhiji realized that untruth, injustice, oppression, and tyranny last only as long as their victims accept them. The moment one learns to say no to untruth and injustice, their edifice collapses immediately. This was true for the political, the economic, and the social order. Gandhiji is the greatest apostle of peace the world has seen in the recent past. His notion of peace is focused on tolerance, forgiveness, compassion, oneness, respect, truth force, love force, and soul force. Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the first half of the 20th century, had called Mahatma Gandhi as the supreme practical leader for change. And he said, and I quote, I believe that Gandhi's views were the most enlightened of all the political men in our time. We should strive to do things in his spirit, not to use violence in fighting for our cause, but by non participating in anything you believe is evil. Gandhiji was the conscience keeper of humanity. That his ideas will be an inspiration to us both as individuals and as a society is beyond any doubt. He was an epoch maker, one who could sow the seeds for the next generation from the fruits of the previous one. Mahatma Gandhi is the most powerful visionary and a practical idealist from the first half of the last century, whose life is a role model for us all. But the effort has to begin from a point where you are standing. That is what made all Mahatma Gandhi's idealist actions practical. And he can be truly called a man of action. But it does not only mean that he was very busy, that he was, of course. What we mean is the action of putting ideas or beliefs into practice more than anything else was the driving force in his life. The answer for Mahatma Gandhi was always found in action. He had said, an ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. But if you want to understand Gandhiji, you will have to understand him not only with the intellect, but from the emotional part of view and from acts from his life. Usually, people see him from different perspectives. Some people think of Gandhiji mostly as a politician, but at the same time, some think of him as a saint, and there are others who think of Gandhiji as a nation builder. He may be all this, but I think when we consider Gandhiji, we have to try to find out what is the common stream in all these different aspects of his life that you see in his personality. One was the commitment to values, and the second one was efficiency in the kind of work that he did. This is part of his comprehensiveness, and there was a unique blend of, for example, enthusiasm on one hand and patience on the other. Gandhiji has made significant and seminal contributions that span across such disciplines as environment, economics, spirituality, conflict resolution, international peace, civil rights, reforms, education, society, politics, and many, many more. At that time, the most harmful and destructive impact on the world was that of imperialism, violence, war, materialism, and the greed for controlling the world. Gandhiji advised to shun these seven social sins in his speech on October 22nd, 1925. Politics without principle, wealth without work, commerce without ethics, knowledge without character, pleasure without conscience, science without morality, worship without sacrifice. In my opinion, Mahatma Gandhi's life left the most powerful and strong imprint on the humanity of the world. He had said, my life is my message. John Haynes Holmes was a pacifist, an anti-war activist, and the founder of American Civil Liberties Union. He had met Gandhiji in London and later on in Delhi in 1931 and 47 respectively. He found Mahatma Gandhi's presence, those bright eyes shining through his spectacles, his voice so clear and yet so gentle, his whole presence so simple and yet so strong. He said, and I quote, I believe that he is unquestionably the greatest man living in the world today. When I think of Gandhi, I think of Jesus Christ. I will play the Gandhi Katha dhun in Hindi about Gandhiji's philosophy of truth, non-violence, and purity of means that combine together in the form of satyagraha. Time magazine had listed out three most important protests over 190 years. The first one was the Boston Tea Party. The second one was the Dandi March or Salt Satyagraha. And the third one was the March of Washington. We can see a common thread. The first and second were against the same company, the East India Company. There is a common thread of non-violence in all three. In 1930, with a pinch of salt, Mahatma Gandhi shook the world. He started out on 12th March from his Sabarmati ashram in Ahmedabad in Gujarat for Dandi seashore, along with 79 fellow marchers, walked for 24 days, walking 10 miles a day, stopped at 48 villages, gave speeches morning and evening to mobilize people, and covered 241 miles till he reached the Dandi seashore on 5th April. On 6th April, early in the morning hours, when he bent down to pick up a fistful of muddy lump of earth with salt, 100,000 people joined him, and towards the progress of the salt satyagraha, 300,000 people broke the salt law all over India. 1,362 newspapers covered the world news worldwide. William Lawrence Shearer, the American journalist who was present during the salt satyagraha at the Dharasana salt depot, sent his graphic reporting to the world, and that brought the incidents of brutality to the notice of the world. So Mahatma Gandhi remains the most powerful global ambassador of ahimsa or non-violence, a youth icon for opposing injustice of all kinds, an apostle of peace and non-violence, a man whose values can make the world a better place today. In 1904 in South Africa, after reading John Ruskin's book Unto This Last, Barrister Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi transformed his life overnight and started leading a community life of self-control, voluntary poverty, bread labor, and sarvodaya, welfare of all. He established 4 ashrams in his lifetime, 2 in South Africa called Phoenix Settlement in 1904 and Tolstoy Farm in 1910, and 2 ashrams in India called Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in 1917 and the Sevagram Ashram in Wardha, Maharashtra in 1936. It is here that Kasturba Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, along with the ashram community, lived in poverty like the common villagers of India. His ashrams were his ideals of a non-violent face-to-face society for Sarvodaya, the welfare of all, for Swavalamban, self-reliance, for Swachhata, cleanliness, and Seva, service of humanity through by carrying out constructive programs for realizing his vision of village republic or Gram Swaraj. Gandhiji's ashrams had a mingling of political and spiritual aims. It was a practical laboratory for transforming ordinary men and women into extraordinary seekers and satyagrahis for offering the highest sacrifice of their lives in the nonviolent freedom struggle on one hand, and to get involved in constructive programs to serve the poorest of the poor on the other hand, to establish their self respect and dignity. The constructive programs were his second gift to humanity, the first gift being Satyagraha. I am happy to inform you that I was born in his last ashram in Sevagram. My father was inspired by Gandhiji since his childhood and joined the non-violent freedom struggle in India and lived in the Sevagram ashram. Even after Gandhiji passed on in 1948, for more than 5 decades, my parents and all of us have continued to walk on the path that Gandhiji has shown to humanity. The life and thoughts of Mahatma Gandhi are intertwined and inseparable. His politics was imbued with his spiritual experiments, and his spirituality was tempered by his vision of a non-violent society. And his constructive program was integral to his politics. The unique practices of Mahatma Gandhi, his control of palate, his fasts, his spinning, his silence, and his prayers gave him the internal strength. They were as much a part of his politics as of his spiritual life. These practices and experiments were sustained and nurtured by the ashram community. The ashram community, through its own practices, affirmed, modified, and validated Mahatma Gandhi's ideals and practices, and continues to do so even till today. This shows the relevance of his practices. Gandhiji carried out his experiments in health and wellness through nature cure in the ashram. It included diet control, fasting, hydrotherapy, sunbath, mud packs, and observing silence for one whole day. Our friend and the British baker, Sir Horace Alexander, stayed in both the ashrams in India with Gandhiji for some time. He noticed that the bell used to ring 56 times during the day in the ashram. He said, and I quote, Gandhiji had wonderful courtesy and punctuality. I was to learn quickly that he was the slave of watch. He had more to do in every 24 hours than almost any other man. So he had learned how to pack the most into every minute. Yet he never gave the impression of being hurried and impatient. So Gandhiji comes across us as the role model of punctuality, promptness, and discipline, and definitely we can learn from that. Gandhiji has given three gifts to humanity. The first one, as I said, is Satyagraha. The second one is constructive program. And the third gift is Ekadasha Vrata, or the 11 observances. These were a set of rules for the ashram inmates introduced by Gandhiji for spiritual progress and voluntary self-control. The principle behind these rules is to do unto others what you want others to do unto you. Any rule that is followed for a lifetime becomes an observance. And as you all know, observances or vrata give internal strength to those who observe them. Ivan Illich, the Croatian-Austrian philosopher, had come to Sevagram ashram in 1978 and stayed there for a week. Every day he used to sit in the Bapu Kuti or Gandhiji's cottage for a long time and said, and I quote, this hut of Mahatma Gandhi demonstrates to the world how the dignity of the common man can be brought up. It is also a symbol of happiness which we can derive from practicing the principles of simplicity, service, and truthfulness. Now I'll play the Gandhi Katha hymn in Hindi, which explains Gandhiji's philosophy of Satya hi Parmeshwar hai, truth is God.
आँखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, आँखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, सत्य ही है परमेश्वर बापू का बोल, सत्य ही है परमेश्वर बापू का बोल, उसी परमेश्वर की नित्य कर तू शोध, उसी परमेश्वर की नित्य कर तू शोध, आंखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, आंखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल।
Gandhiji's role and contributions to the political arena are well known. What is less known is his contributions towards health and well being. Gandhiji was essentially a man of science. He approached problems in a scientific manner. His message to the world on the vital question of health and well being is very important. To him, the study of this question was part of his service to God and his creation, which was his mission. Knowing to care summed up his life. His message was simple and easy to follow. It encouraged everyone to respect simplicity, voluntary self control, reduce the bonds, follow the tradition, cultural practices and the values, follow the environmental credo, and treat oneself through nature cure for living in harmony with nature. For Gandhiji, the outside universe was but a reflection of the inside universe. He repeated time and again that the universe is compressed in the atom. There is not one law for the atom and another for the universe. It was based on his actual spiritual experience that gave him the conviction that the moral principles have no meaning unless they can be made to serve as the guide of conduct in the daily affairs of man. The Sanskrit proverb Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande says, "You are the universe within the universe. As with the self, so is the universe. What is going on within you is same as what is going on in the universe." From the mind body perspective, Gandhiji's standpoint was that health is an optimal integration of body, mind, spirit, soul, and environment. Environment is our extended body. There is a nice Vedic expression from the ancient traditions of India which says, "As is the atom, so is the universe. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the universal body, so is the cosmic body. As is the universal mind, so is the cosmic mind." Dr. Sherwood Eddy was a leading American Protestant missionary, a prolific writer and an educator who visited Mahatma Gandhi in the Sabarmati ashram in 1921 and wrote that Gandhi's bodily presence is like that of Apostle Paul or Socrates. He said, and I quote, "He impressed us as the most childlike, the most transparent, the most lovable of man." His whole character is centered in his unique passion in truth and reality. Very few people know that as a couple, Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi contributed immensely 123 years ago to public health emergency, working as frontline workers selflessly in all kinds of disaster in the service of humanity in South Africa and India. In the Spanish influenza pandemic of 1918, Gandhiji opened up his Sabarmati ashram as a quarantine center and treated and served patients through nature cure, provided simple vegetarian diet to boost immunity and maintain physical distancing. Gandhiji and Kasturba took care of the families of the patients, looked after their physical, mental, and spiritual needs, gave correct information, and helped in being positive through prayer, meditation, and recitation of Ramanama, and taking care of each other during the time of the Spanish flu pandemic. Gandhiji had said on 10th November 1918, "Our ancestors could build such tough bodies in the past, but today we are reduced to a state of miserable weakness and are easily infected by noxious germs moving about in the air. There is one and only one really effective way by which we can save ourselves from them, even in our present broken state of health. That way is the way of self restraint, Sanyam, or of imposing a limit on our acts, wants, and desire." In August 1942, Gandhiji wrote the book Key to Health, in which he wrote that anyone who observes the rules of health mentioned in this book will find that he has got in it a real key to unlock the gates of the leading him to health. He will not need to knock at the doors of doctors or Vaidyas or the traditional health practitioners from day to day. Today, the world is facing three kinds of crises globally. First is the COVID 19 pandemic, the second is the serious and long drawn financial crisis, and the third is the ecological crisis, which is impacting everyone. We have to look for answers somewhere within ourselves by learning from Mahatma Gandhi. his life and action, who had said, "My life is my message." The lesson the pandemic is teaching us is simple. When one member of the family falls sick, the entire family is affected, and soon the community is affected, the nation is affected, and then other communities in other nations in this globalized world. The well being of one individual has an impact on people on the other side of the globe. This is true of every action of ours. What we eat, what we buy, what we think, and what we do has reverberations and repercussions on all life on earth. It is this anubandha, this interconnectedness, that sustains all life on earth. We are all in this together as one human family, as brothers and sisters. And whether we choose to see it or not, we only have one home, this planet Earth, our Mother Earth. Our ancient sages and seers have always looked upon us as global citizens, as Vishwamanava, and said that the world is one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The current COVID 19 pandemic is a wake up call for every country, big or small, rich or poor, developed or developing. It has opened our eyes to the fragility of the existence of humans. We have to learn to live with COVID 19 now and in the future as well. Instead of reinventing a new lifestyle, we just have to get inspired from the life of Mahatma Gandhi to make the necessary changes in thought, action, and conduct for coping up physically, mentally, and spiritually. And this is the future that the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic is pointing out to us if we observe carefully. When a crisis makes you feel stressed, meditation, prayer, and chanting relieve the stress response. Fear and anxiety are forms of stress that become exaggerated when events become uncertain, when you feel a loss of control over the situation, and when the stress keeps repeating itself without let up. The thinking mind reacts to all these conditions. It always has, even in normal times. But a crisis brings all these into high relief, making it very capable of lowering the immune systems of our bodies and causing inflammatory diseases. Decades ago, stress was classified as epidemic of modern life. The Gandhian way of life is the best guide to practicing the coping mechanism that induces relaxation, calmness, inner peace, fearlessness, absence of anxiety, and remaining positive. Therefore, Gandhiji comes across as the greatest healer, the wellness guru, lifestyle guru, who is valid, who is relevant for all times to come. The Gandhian principles of freedom from fear and care for all is a perfect prescription in the times of crisis. Gandhiji's emphasis on healthy lifestyle, positive thinking, empowerment for self care and care in the community would make perfect sense. I once again take this opportunity to thank the Indian Mission for hosting the Gandhi Katha. My special thanks are to all of you who have joined me online. I will end with the peace benediction in Sanskrit for the universal welfare. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let all be happy, let all be healthy, let all experience auspiciousness, let no one be overwhelmed by grief. Om Peace, Peace, Peace. With Gandhiji's blessings, who had said that peace is the only positive force which will lead us from darkness towards light. I will end with the Gandhi Katha hymn, Shubha Mangal Ho. May there be auspicious good, may there be good, may the earth be auspicious, may the sky be auspicious, may every particle on earth be auspicious.
शुभ मंगल हो शुभ